Welcome back. All right, a term that's getting used more recently, at least it feels like more recently than we've seen in previous years, is parity. We've talked about parity on this channel before, and I mean Parity, not Parody, which is, of course, life. So on the board here, I've got Vegas all the way down to Chicago. This is the official standings. This is the order everybody's in. I didn't go by points percentage. If I did, LA would be higher for an example. There are others that if we went by points percentage might be a little bit higher. But to keep things simple, I went with the official standings by points according to the NHL site. So Vegas is number one. They're 7-3 in their last 10. They're first in the Pacific. 6 points ahead of Edmonton and 8 points ahead of LA. Vegas, it feels like, is pretty home and cooled when it comes to the division. But recently they lost back-to-back at home against the Islanders and the Rangers. Then last night they took care of Minnesota. But for Vegas, we'll see, right? The Vegas Golden Knights, Stanley Cup champions not too long ago. And so maybe they end up winning it again. But this is where that parity word comes in. Because you could very likely come up with a team off the top of your head right now. You'd say, well, this team might very well beat them. Now, the Capitals have faced Vegas in the Stanley Cup final before. So it'd be interesting if they finished 1-2 in the standings and happened again. Washington, 5-2-3 over their last 10. And it's been interesting because their games have been very close lately, but they've lost some close ones too. So they're first in the division. They're 5 points ahead of New Jersey and 6 points ahead of the Rangers. Much like Vegas, it feels like they're most likely going to win the division. Be kind of a surprise if they didn't, right? They've got, I believe, games in hand on New Jersey. This month they've got wins over the Rangers, Nashville, and Vancouver. They had an overtime loss against Ottawa and shootout losses against Minnesota and Buffalo. So close games all around. The Capitals have had some struggles in some of those games, but they're still second overall. And maybe part of the reason why Vegas and Washington has had some setbacks recently is, teams always say they don't look at the standings, but they do, because you can tell when a team has a big cushion atop their division, they may not be as motivated as other teams that are playing against them. Winnipeg, they are 6-2-2 in their last 10. They're first in their division, of course, being the Central. 3 points ahead of Minnesota and 6 points ahead of Dallas. They've won 2 out of 3, but they've also lost 3 out of 5 in January. So they're on the right track, but if you look at the overall January picture, it's basically one of those half empty, half full kind of things, right? Is the glass half empty or half full? So Winnipeg, who have been first overall earlier in the season, staying in the hunt. Minnesota, the injury-ravaged Minnesota Wild have lost 2 out of 3, but they've won 7 out of their last 10. They're 3 points ahead of Dallas and 5 points ahead of Colorado in a division where 1 through 4 are tight. And so we'll see with all the injury issues that have been going on with Minnesota if they can keep up the pace. The loss against Vegas last night, that's kind of to be expected. Vegas had lost 2 in a row prior to that. Minnesota, just with the amount of defensemen that are out, it's very difficult against a team like Vegas with the amount of depth they have. Toronto, they're 6-4 in their last 10. They won 4 in a row, and now they've lost 2 in a row. So we'll see which team is the real team. But they're first in their division, the Atlantic, right? 3 points ahead of Florida and 7 points ahead of Tampa. So the state of Florida trying to chase down Toronto. It would be kind of fun if Toronto won their division, only because that hasn't happened in a long time, right? So the Toronto Maple Leafs being 5th overall, kind of a fun story. New Jersey, they're 5-4-1 in their last 10. They are one of the 2 teams on the board that got swept on California trips in recent history. They are 1 point clear of Carolina, 10 points ahead of Columbus. So they don't really have to worry about Columbus. They should very well be a top 3 team. I think the top 3 teams in the Metro are pretty set. Unless Columbus keeps this ridiculous run going, but we shall see. New Jersey had a rough road trip of 1-4-1, but they're back home, and so, with that win at home against Tampa, maybe that'll start righting the ship. So we shall see. Tomorrow they're at home against Florida, so that'll be a big test for them. Dallas, 8-1-1 in their last 10. They'd won 7 in a row going into last night's game against Ottawa, which Ottawa won. They're 2 points ahead of Colorado. Dallas is an interesting one in that 7-game winning streak. A lot of close games in there. They needed some comebacks here and there too. The Dallas Stars are going to be fascinating to watch in the second half. As the team I picked to win the Stanley Cup this year, it's definitely going to help my odds of being right if they make the playoffs. So, because last year I picked New Jersey and whoops. So Dallas right now definitely looks like they'll make the playoffs. Could be dangerous in said playoffs. We'll see if they can keep up their recent run of good play. The Edmonton Oilers, 7-2-1 in their last 10. They've won 4 out of 5. They're 2 points ahead of Los Angeles, and they're 7 points ahead of Vancouver. So their chase of the Vegas Golden Knights is a difficult one in that Vegas needs to start losing a little more regularly, and they don't seem to have any interest in doing that. Whereas the Oilers, they just keep plugging along. And if they're one of those teams now too that if they're down, I kind of assume they could come back and win it. Carolina 5-3-2 in their last 10. They've won 3 of their last 4. They've started to right the ship after some really mediocre play there. They're 9 points clear of Columbus, so I don't think they have anything to worry about in terms of dropping down in the standings. But if they get things together and start winning on a more regular basis, as they have over the last 4, they could very well pass the New Jersey Devils and then start considering chasing down the Washington Capitals, right? So we shall see with that one. The LA Kings, 6-2-2 in their last 10. This month they have wins over New Jersey, Tampa Bay, and they have a win over Winnipeg as well, so they play well when they have to. They're 5 points clear of Vancouver and 6 points clear of the Calgary Flames. So, much like others on the board here, I think the top 3 in the Pacific is not necessarily set, but it feels like these are the top 3 teams we're going to see. And if we get Edmonton and LA again in the first round, are we really going to be all that surprised? Are we honestly going to be all that surprised? Florida, they're 5-4-1 in their last 10. They've lost 3 out of 5. They are second in the division, 4 points ahead of Tampa and 6 points ahead of Boston. So, pretty safe. I don't feel like Boston's chasing them down anytime soon, even though they're 5-4-1 over their last 10. That's still 11 points, whereas Boston has 7 points in their last 10. So, they're actually gaining ground on Boston, despite having lost 3 of their last 5. Keep in mind, though, that the most recent loss being against the Boston Bruins. So we'll see how Florida responds. They are in Philadelphia tonight and in New Jersey tomorrow night. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. Colorado, 7-2-1 in their last 10. However, they've lost 2 of their last 3. They are the number 1 wild card, 5 points ahead of Vancouver and 6 points ahead of the Calgary Flames. So Colorado, definitely a playoff team. Definitely in the hunt to move up in that division. The problem is, while they're 7-2-1 in their last 10, Winnipeg 6-2-2, Minnesota 7-3, Dallas 8-1-1, it is difficult to make up that room on, or make up that point deficit that you've got with teams ahead of you when they won't lose more regularly. So Colorado did themselves a favor against Minnesota and then hurt that favor against the Winnipeg Jets where they lost. Tampa Bay 5-4-1 in their last 10. They also got swept in California, as did New Jersey. They're third in the division, 2 points ahead of Boston and 4 points ahead of Ottawa. So they're not out of the woods, but they've got games in hand on other teams around them. So I don't think there's any reason for concern. Tampa's going to miss the playoffs, but it is interesting to see they're only 4 points clear of the playoff line in the East, right? Vancouver 3-3-4 in their last 10. We have talked a lot about, hey, at least they got a point. They lost 4 in a row, and then they won in Toronto. So Vancouver needs to win a little more regularly. It's not the prettiest hockey they're playing, but I mean, if they can win, it'll be interesting to see how that style works against the Winnipeg Jets tomorrow night, because Winnipeg, pretty good team there, and Vancouver's had their struggles. They're 1 point clear of Calgary in that second wildcard spot. They're 4 points ahead of St. Louis. So, not entirely comfortable above the playoff line, because here comes Calgary, 5-3-2 in their last 10, so they have 12 points in their last 10. Vancouver, 10 points in their last 10, so they're slowly gaining ground here. They did beat LA in their last game, so Calgary's shown they can win. Dustin Wolf definitely helps, and being 1 point out of the playoffs at this stage of the season is a win for Calgary. They were expected to be rebuilding. Boston, they're the number 1 wild card. Isn't it interesting that the team that's out of the playoffs in the West has a better standing than either Boston or Columbus, the wild cards in the East? But Boston 3-6-1 in their last 10. Before that win in Florida, they had lost 6 in a row. As the number 1 wild card, they have a bunch of teams to worry about. 1 point ahead of Columbus, 2 points ahead of Ottawa, 3 points ahead of Detroit, Montreal, and Pittsburgh. So that's a lot of teams fighting for just a couple of playoff spots. And at this point, it rules them out as being sellers at the deadline. Mostly. I mean, you're going to see some pending UFAs get dealt anyways, no matter where these guys are, if they feel like they can't re-sign them. But Probably not a full-on sale like you might normally see. Columbus, the number 2 wild card, they are 7-2-1 in their last 10. They have won 4 games in a row. And so, yeah, Columbus is going to be one to keep an eye on. They're at home against Philadelphia tomorrow, a team that's beaten them twice, but that should be a winnable game for them, especially being at home, right? They could make it 5 in a row. They're 1 point clear of Ottawa. They have to be very careful because Ottawa seems to be heating up. They're 2 points ahead of Detroit, who have definitely heated up. So is Montreal. Pittsburgh threatens to. They never seem to really, can keep that run going. And they're 4 points clear of the Rangers, who are not quite as dead as people thought they were a few weeks ago. So Columbus has some work to do to stay above the line. Below the line, 1 point back of Columbus is Ottawa. They are 4-5-1 in their last 10, but they lost 4 in a row, and now they've won 2 in a row. So there's the parity that shows up, just how quickly the things can change. And a team that's losing all of a sudden goes, right, we know how to win. And then vice versa happens as well. A team that's winning and going really well, all of a sudden it falls apart. Detroit 7-3 in their last 10. They're 2 points back of Columbus for that final wild card spot, and they've won 7 in a row. And it's been a lot of fun to watch. Now I've started seeing people complain that their schedule's been easy, but when you are looking at the kind of record that Detroit had before this winning streak, there's no such thing as easy. Your team is right near the bottom of the NHL. It's no such thing as easy. So winning 7 in a row is impressive because they would have found a way to lose. I'd say 5 out of the 7 before the coaching change. Todd McLellan has definitely made a difference. That coaching bump is a thing. Is it sustainable through the second half of the season? You never know. It'd be fun to see Detroit in the playoffs again. But it would be fun to see Montreal in the playoffs as well. And they're 2 points out of the playoffs. 7-2-1 in their last 10. And they've had 4 straight now that have been decided in extra time. They've won 3 of the 4. The most recent one they lost in a shootout against Dallas. So Montreal keeping every game close. That's the key thing. If you get it to overtime, you go for that extra point. But if you go to extra time, you at least get that point. The Vancouver way, right? So for Montreal, it's been a lot of fun to watch them pull themselves back into contention after a really brutal start. And then you got St. Louis, 5-4-1 in their last 10. They're 4 points back of Vancouver. They've lost 3 out of 5 this month. So St. Louis has had opportunities. They just haven't quite got above that line. And some of these losses are really of the stinging variety. So we'll see whether or not they can get themselves on a run between now and the trade deadline and force the GM to go out and buy at the deadline. Pittsburgh, 3-4-3 in their last 10. They're 2 points back of Columbus. They've only won 1 out of 6 this month. I felt like when Pittsburgh started winning and got themselves back into the hunt, that maybe they kind of, I don't want to say they took it for granted because that'd be me speaking for the team, but their play just kind of fell off. And to me, it seemed like some of the ferocious play we saw for them to get back into the playoff hunt kind of died off a bit. So they're going to have to find that next level for themselves, and it's not easy. It's easy for me to say it standing in front of a whiteboard in my room here, but easier said than done, right? So we'll see if Pittsburgh can reverse their fortunes. 3-4-3 just isn't gonna cut it. Utah 2-6-2 in their last 10. They're 5 points back of Vancouver. And it was a couple weeks ago we were looking at Utah and saying, well, this could be a playoff team. They could get there. They've lost 3 out of 4. They do have a win over Calgary this month, so I think Utah can play better than they have recently. But that inconsistent offense is so bewildering and baffling to me. Utah has a really good offensive core there. It's just it's not consistent enough for them. Then you got the Rangers, 4-5-1 in their last 10, but they've won 3 of their last 4. They are quietly getting better. That game against Dallas, they probably should have won that game against Dallas. Just it was, they got the big lead and then they fell apart and then they came back and lose it in overtime. But they're only 4 points back of Columbus. We've got about half a season left, so can't say the Rangers are out of it. And anytime I see interviews with the Rangers right now, they're all saying all the right things. So the mindset seems to be correct for them to get themselves really and truly back in the hunt, maybe above the line, right? The Islanders are 5-5 in their last 10, but they've won 3 in a row, including an impressive win in Vegas. Same as the Rangers, impressive win in Vegas, right? Now, the Islanders, 5 points back of Columbus, and for the Islanders, regulation wins might be where there's an issue. Keep in mind that last season regulation wins decided that the Washington Capitals got into the playoffs instead of Detroit, and everybody thought that was great. So we'll see if we come down to regulation wins again this year. The Islanders could do themselves a favor and just finish above teams that they need to, rather than being tied in points. But we're still a ways out from that. Anaheim, 5-4-1 in their last 10. They've got wins this month against Winnipeg, Tampa Bay, and Carolina. Not the prettiest wins in them, but they're getting wins, right? So it doesn't matter how you get those points, you get them. And they're only 7 points out of the playoffs, 7 points back of Vancouver, which sounds like a lot, but honestly, compared to other seasons for Anaheim, you'll take it, I would think. Anaheim fans are pretty happy with the way things are going right now, I think, right? Sure you are. Anyways, just right now the Ducks fans go, I'm not happy. We're not above the playoff line. But hey, my standard for them was at least get into the hunt, and I think they are. 7 points back is probably at least a couple of points further back than they probably should be. Because while they've got wins over Winnipeg, Tampa, and Carolina, there's also losses they've taken in games where they probably should have had that win. But you got to lose to learn how to win, is the old phrase, right? Philadelphia's 4-5-1 in their last 10. They're 5 points back of Columbus. They did get that big win over Anaheim, which was good because they'd lost 4 in a row. 5 points back of Columbus. It feels like they're still trending in the wrong direction. They're going to have to find that energy. I did make the joke that, hey, you could try to tell the guys there's a Cutter Gauthier on every roster, but I don't know. I don't know if Philadelphia can bring that kind of energy and intensity night after night. But if they can channel that, they could absolutely go on a run and be a threat. Seattle, 3-6-1 in their last 10. They've lost 5 out of 6. They're 9 points back of Vancouver. I had considered putting the line I have here over top of Seattle and saying, you know what, not making the playoffs this year, but not quite 10 points out. And is Seattle capable of going on a run? Probably. So this is where the parity side of it comes in. I don't think Seattle has a bad roster. I don't think Philadelphia does either. I think that Philadelphia, I think their issues, I think it's in net, maybe a little bit with depth there for Philadelphia as well. With Seattle, the goaltending definitely, I do feel like they need a little more from Grubauer. And I've talked about that really honestly through their 4-year history. The odd part being last year, Grubauer was really good. Comparatively speaking to the other 3 seasons, this season included in that, Grubauer's numbers last year were actually pretty decent. So we'll see if Seattle can rally and use Decord to get that run, or maybe find another goaltender, make some changes, and go for it. 9 points back is a lot, though. It really is. At this time of the season, 9 points is a lot. Same for Buffalo. They're 9 points back of Columbus. They're 5-4-1 in their last 10. And they have wins this month over Washington and Ottawa. So at times, Buffalo looks pretty good. They look like a team that should be contending for a playoff spot. And yet the record shows they're not contending for a playoff spot. And if you want to see a team that loses games they should have won, Buffalo is a prime example. Recently, very, very recently against Seattle, for instance, you get a 2-0 lead. You look fantastic after the first, and then you Buffalo it. So I wanted to put the orange line over top, but I feel like, if you're within 10 points of a playoff spot, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Although Buffalo, I would think, selling at the deadline. Then you got Nashville, 4-5-1 in their last 10. They did get back-to-back road wins over Calgary and Vancouver, so don't take them lightly. But they are 15 points out of the playoffs. So this is where the parity kind of falls off. Although, coming into this season, many, myself included, expected them to be a playoff team after adding Stamkos and Marchessault and already being a surprise playoff team last year, which I think also boosts the idea that there's parity. You had Nashville last season. Nobody expected them to be a playoff team. They made it. This year, most expect them to be a playoff team, and they're not a playoff team. So that, to me, is part of the measure of whether or not you have parity in the league, and any team can beat any team kind of thing. Rangers being below the playoff line. Another example of, there's parity. You got to keep going. San Jose, 2-7-1 over their last 10, but they do have wins over Tampa Bay and New Jersey. Teams that were swept when they went through California. 16 points back of Vancouver. Yeah, San Jose's not making the playoffs. We knew that before the season started. It does feel like they've made some progress over last year. It's just the progress might be kind of slow for some fans. In Chicago, 2-8 over their last 10, but they've got wins this month over Montreal and Colorado. Montreal's red hot. Colorado's been really good. Both those teams 7-2-1. And those twos there, Chicago put those on them. So, or at least one of the 2 losses. 18 points back of Vancouver for Chicago. They continue to be at the bottom of the league even after the coaching change, but after the coaching change, they have been playing better. So, yeah, things in Chicago, while they're not a lot of fun for, I would think, the players or for fans, you can see that this is a team that if you take them lightly, they could beat you. Most recently against Edmonton, that game was close. That game was close, and at points it looked like Chicago might pull off an upset victory. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think there is parity in the NHL or nah? Let me know your thoughts on that. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.